A jogger murdered in New York Central Park. A little girl gunned down in her family's car in Los Angeles.
A judge has sentenced 2 boys for killing another child who refused to steal candy for them.
There's a tidal wave of juvenile violent crime right over the horizon.
And some who study it say the worst is yet to come.
Life in the 1990s was dominated by a sense that youth violence was out of control. The future looked bleak. To explain why, one word said it all.
Super predators.
Some social scientists and criminologists looked at the data and saw doom. They stepped out of their ivory towers and into the public arena to sound the alarm about a coming wave of kids who were going to ravage the country.
Hi you guys, and thank you for watching my channel. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. But today we are going to talk about something different. It's going to be very much political, very much Black Lives Matter at the earliest stage. Okay, so this is the type of things I normally talk about with my friends, family, significant other, colleagues. We keep some very intellectual conversations going. But I decided to go ahead and bring that back to my YouTube channel because initially my YouTube channel was very much educational, etc. One night I woke up out of a dream and I was just remembering the news constantly showing Black teenagers being thrown in jail or committing crimes. And it was like the political agenda was to dehumanize us. But as a kid, I'm like, why do we all, I'm like, why do I see all these Black people on TV being bad? As a kid, I'm just thinking, okay, maybe it's my imagination overreacting. I actually scrolled past a video on YouTube and had a whole epiphany, y'all. This was the news clip I remember dreaming about and seeing as a kid. And basically what it talked about was the Superpredator Myth. And if you guys have never heard of Superpredator and you're Black, you need to go do your research. This was literally the scientific study that caused mass incarceration and the massacre of young Black teens. It allowed them to dehumanize us. It allowed juries to find us guilty and give us harsher and allow harsher sentences, such as the death penalty for committing a crime, being associated with the crime, hell, not even doing the crime and getting life in prison. So I'm gonna touch on basically the Superpredator Myth and give you guys one case that was near and dear to my heart. Once I saw the video, eventually I started watching this show. And when I watched the show, they talked about Curtis Brooks. And when they talked about his case, y'all, it made me so sick to my stomach, I had to throw up. And I was like, damn, this is how they viewed us. Because this is how they view us. Like, being Black alone is literally the only weapon you need. It is. And it's sad to say, but it is. And I'm ready for a day when that is not the case. But I have plenty of other videos coming. But this one is basically introducing you guys to the Superpredator Myth, the laws that it has still in effect today that allow teenagers to be incarcerated at large numbers, given harsher sentences, and trialed as adults. This notion was created by John J. Dilulio Jr., a criminologist and political scientist, whom came up with this idea. He predicted a large increase in youth crimes and violence due to super predators. He described the youth as impulsive juvenile criminals who are willing to commit violent crimes without remorse.
Young juvenile criminal who is so impulsive, so remorseless, that he can kill, rape, maim, without giving it a second thought. That the country writ large was going to hell in a handbasket. No one had a clear idea of what to do.
Political scientist John Dilulio taught at Princeton University and had done extensive research in prisons studying the criminal justice system. From 1984 to 1994, when Sandifer was killed, teenage homicide rates had more than doubled. Dilulio looked at studies that estimated that by 2000, there would be 1 million more teens between the ages of 14 and 17, and he predicted crime rates would snowball even more.
You'd have a doubling or a tripling in the rate of youth violence in the time between the mid-90s and up to through mid-2000s.
Perhaps most troubling to Dilulio was what he saw as an indication that the small percentage of kids who commit the most violent crimes would be much more destructive than the generation before them.
Studies found that essentially 6% of every male youth cohort was responsible for about 50% of all the violent crimes committed by that cohort. That small fraction of people is going to be able to wreak incredible havoc.
Dilulio wasn't the only one predicting a surge in crime.
By the year 2005, we may very well have a bloodbath of teenage violence.
Northeastern University criminologist James Fox says his choice of words was deliberate.
I did sound an alarm, and I did use some rather strong language in terms of what might happen if we didn't react quickly.
In 1995, John Dilulio, a professor at Princeton who coined the term predators, predicted that the number of juveniles in custody would increase threefold in the coming years, and that by 2010, there would be an estimated 270,000 more young predators on the street than in 1990. Criminologist John Fox joined in, saying publicly, unless we act today, we are going to have a bloodbath when these kids grow up. These predictions set off a panic, fueled by highly publicized heinous crimes committed by juvenile offenders, which led nearly every state to pass legislation between 1992 and 1999 that drastically increased the treatment of juveniles as adults for purposes of sentencing and punishment. As Dilulio and Fox themselves later admitted, the prediction of juvenile superpredator epidemic turned out to be completely wrong. But in fact, violent juvenile crime rates had already started to fall in the mid-1990s in the midst of the panic. By 2000s, the juvenile homicide rate stabilized below the 1985 level, okay? So they created this huge panic. Then they used the imagery of African Americans and other people of color to basically put a target on our backs, having our kids sentenced to death and sentenced to life in prison, only for them to turn around and admit, hey, I was wrong. My scientific notation, my study, and my resources all led me to believe one thing when in all retrospect, the complete opposite happened. And now I'm going to talk to you guys about Curtis Brooks, who is sadly one of those that were sentenced to life. Okay, so before I go over the case, I'll go ahead and introduce them to you guys. At the top left, we have Dion Roosevelt Harris. Bottom left is Curtis Brooks, whom we're discussing. The bottom right is Sean Steele. And the top right is Michael Parks. Now, this incident happened in 1995. Curtis Brooks was 15 and homeless at the time. He had moved to Colorado from Maryland to reunite with his mother, who had been in and out of his life due to her addiction. He recalls, getting out here, I was happy. All I ever wanted was my parents, and it turned out it was not at all what I was hoping for. He ended up on the streets, gratefully accepting offers to sleep on couches, garage floors, and basically moving house to house. One day in April, he sought refuge from a blizzard watching kids play Mortal Kombat in the mall arcade. And of course, he had his handy-dandy book bag, which he carried his only possessions, which were a few t-shirts, a pair of sandals, a video game magazine, a tube of cleansing oil, and a face cleaner. At the arcade, Brooks ran into Dion Harris, whom is at the top left, a teenager he had met a few days earlier who had let him sleep on his couch. Harris and two other boys asked Brooks to help them steal a car. Brooks, who had no criminal record, agreed and was handed a gun. Brooks unknowingly went with the group, not knowing that Michael Parks, Sean Steele, and Dion Roosevelt Harris had all just been on a crime spree this entire morning. And this was like the latest agenda in the midst of their crime spree. The group approached So
The group approached a stranger named Christopher Ramos,
Sean
who was
Steele,
walking to his car
Dion
from an
Harris,
ATM
and
across
Curtis
the street.
Brooks were sentenced
As
to life
instructed,
in prison
Brooks
as children.
fired a distraction
Parks,
shot
Steele,
in the
and
air
Harris all
without
had
warning.
prior criminal records.
Harris, whom
Brooks
is
was the
Dion
only one
Roosevelt
that had
Harris,
none.
shot Ramos in the head, killing him. So once you go back to the clip of him talking about
Sean
it, he
Steele
talks
was
about
then
how
given
Dion
a
Roosevelt
plea.
Harris obviously
Supposedly,
it got very
the judge
trigger-happy.
stated for his small frame, he couldn't imagine
Brooks
a
and the
boy
other
of
boys
his size
ran, but
being
the
in
police
prison.
easily followed their tracks in the snow and arrested them.
Sean Steele was
Brooks
given
confessed
20
to
years
his
in a
role
plea
that
in
day,
clemency.
even though prosecutors acknowledged
Clemency
that he wasn't
is
the one that pulled the
basically a
trigger.
pardon
He was
that
convicted of
exempts a
first-degree
convicted
murder and
individual
given
from any
a mandatory
remaining
sentence
punishment
of
or
life in
future
prison without the
consequences
possibility
stemming from
of parole.
conviction. Communication,
Now, I know as a
which
black
is also another
person, your
form,
parents have told
reduces
you
an
you
individual's
cannot do
sentence
what
either
everybody
fully
else
or
do.
partially.
Mind that shit.
Okay?
Unfortunately, Curtis did not have parents to tell him that. So he didn't get to get that fair warning. He actually had to experience it. Now let's go into what the rest of their asses got, because this is where the whole case got disrespectful and had me so nauseous, y'all.
13-year-old Michael Parks was given 5 years in a juvenile prison. Okay? 5 years. So, in the end, the two black boys, Dion Harris and Curtis Brooks, were given life sentences. Sean Steele, 20 years in clemency, and Michael Parks, 5 years in juvie. That speaks volume. Superpredator, although they labeled it to say that it was all teens, the imagery that it conveyed and how it was racially targeted, it actually only portrayed African Americans and other people of color in a negative light, making us get harsher sentences. This is why I say it was definitely the beginning of media being used for the mass incarceration and the slaughtering of our black youth.
In 1994, Bill Clinton wanted to pass a crime legislation, and it was 3 strikes bill. So if you have 3 felonies, you get a life sentence. Hillary Clinton was the first lady and aggressively lobbied for it. She gave a speech in '94 defending this piece of legislation. Now, she had many different defenses to it, and some of it were good parts of the bill, including community policing. And here in this clip, she's going to be talking about gangs, not just all kids, not just black kids. But when they talk about super predators, they almost always meant young African-American kids. And so here is Hillary Clinton talking about what should be done with them.
Not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
Bring them to heel. Very rarely was the term super predator ever used in reference to white kids. Perhaps sometimes in reference to the Columbine kids, but almost always when talking about black kids in inner cities who are in gangs. So I'm giving you the full context. It wasn't just that she was talking about super predators, and it wasn't just regular old kids walking down the street. But was it racially used, that term? Yes, it most certainly was. It was used over and over by Republicans, adopted by the Clintons to scare everybody. Oh, watch out for the super predators. They have no conscience. They have no empathy. We got to bring them to heel. So is that quote accurate? Hell yes, it's accurate. That's why we went and got the video for you guys. So I remember when we first ran the story based on a story by Michelle Alexander, who was one of the leading African-American scholars in this country. People couldn't believe the quote. Well, here she is saying it. And if it wasn't clear enough, here it is again and again.
Not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel. Not just gangs of